What's up, everybody? Once again, it is I, James, coming to you from the Nerdy Mewzings Podcast studio. I am very excited to be joined today by inker extraordinaire, inker of the stars, and a fantastic artist in his own right, Mr. Kevin Conrad. How you doing today, sir?
Good, man. How you doing, James?
I'm doing good, buddy. How was that intro?
Good.
Did I oversell?
I can live with that.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, I like it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's not. If anything, I undersold it, man. You've been in this industry.
Yeah.
You've been in this industry for such a long time, man.
Well, I do appreciate that. Thank you so much.
And like we've talked about, you are a big fan of Kiss. I think it's easy. I think it's safe to say you like Kiss.
I can spin this camera around. You can see my Kiss room. We'll just give you a little. There you go. Let's see. Oh,
wow.
Who's that standing there?
There
Look
he
at that
is.
right over there. Right? Yeah. Over here, a little bit more. This is my
Beautiful.
Kiss room. This is my jam room. This is my practice room for my drums. Yeah.
So for those of us into comics, we have our comic stuff behind us. You have all your drum set, all your Kiss memorabilia. When did that love of Kiss start? Like right when they hit the scene?
No, almost. It was about 75. I mean, 1975, I was about 14 years old. Prior to discovering Kiss, my entire room was covered in Marvel posters. Whether it was my own art or stuff that I bought, that type of thing as well,
Yeah.
And I discovered Kiss with Kiss Alive, the first live album. And slowly I started replacing the Marvel posters with the Kiss posters until my entire room was covered with Kiss posters and stuff that I drew, and that kind of stuff as well. Yeah.
And you have maintained that love to this day.
To this day, 1975, 2025, 50 years. Oh my God.
Amazing.
Yeah, 50 years of it. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because the leap from comics to Kiss isn't that great of a leap because they kind of look like comic characters or superheroes with their different personas, different face paint and everything.
That's true. And I think honestly, that was my original attraction when I saw the cover to Kiss Alive, and I was like, who the hell is this band, and thankfully I enjoyed the music as well, because, I was just started to really get into music and listen to music and stuff like that. And it was always about rock and roll. I have a brother that's 4 years older. And so I was hearing music from him. My sister was 7 years older. I was hearing music from her. And I never heard Kiss from them. And then my buddy showed me this album and he played me that Kiss Alive. And I was like, oh my God, these guys, they're not, they're not Rush, I get it, it's not, you know what I mean? But there's something about their music. I mean, it is, simple enough, but there's something super fun, super, especially that period of time, super heavy, super rock and roll, and I'm looking at that cover and I'm listening to this music and I'm saying, oh my God. And it just sold me, from that point forward,
Yeah.
So I never lost my love for the comics, but my walls, had taken a turn for something else, and that was replacing the Marvel superhero stuff with Kiss, any Kiss poster or any pinup I could find ended up on my walls, on my ceiling, you name it. It was there. Yeah.
Well, Gene's such a larger than life personality too. I mean, that's got to be some of the draw to it, is that front man. I heard a few things. He's into comics, isn't he? Or
he's absolutely.
Yeah, because I remember.
Yeah,
I've heard some things over the years.
Yeah. He's he's a big comics fan, a big horror fan as well. Like Lon Chaney Sr., that type of stuff too. Like a lot of his persona itself is based on, Lon Chaney, the actor, the father of Lon Chaney Jr., who actually portrayed the Wolfman in like the 1943 Wolfman, that type of thing. And a lot of his poses and a lot of those very, very famous photographs back in the day, they were complete homages to Lon Chaney Sr. with a lot of that stuff. And everybody thinks Paul, Paul's the front, the quintessential front man of the band, so to speak.
Right.
Paul Stanley was the star child. But if you ask anybody like any layman, any
I'm pointing at myself right now.
Yeah,
because I consider Gene the front man.
Yes, absolutely, man. I mean, he was the image that everybody thinks of first. And honestly, even before Paul, after that, you got to think of the Spaceman, Ace Frehley. That was probably the second most famous image you have to think of, I think.
Yeah.
To me anyway. But yeah. And the fact that, they started out in 75 and shortly after that, maybe a couple years later, maybe it was 78, and they came out with a Marvel comic book, magazine format, comic book. And of course I bought that right off the stands at the time and stuff. And so, it's been quite the run with them.
So
sure.
Talking about Gene with the love of horror and stuff, it's safe to say him and our friend Guy Dorian Sr. would probably get along pretty well. Because whereas your room is full of Kiss stuff and music stuff, Mr. Guy Dorian's room is full of life-size horror mannequins and horror memorabilia and everything else.
Yeah. There is definitely a connection there, right? And it's crazy how, prior to the project I'm working on with Guy now, I never worked with him beforehand, and probably the last 10 years or so, he's been really wanting to work with me, and this is an opportunity for us to work together, and the connections, the similarities, and all that kind of stuff between me and Kiss and Guy and horror. All that kind of thing. It's a small world, man. It really is.
It really is. And I want to get to your earlier, start and everything, but I want to talk a little bit about how you met Guy and when you guys met, and then, we can get into your current project and everything a little bit later in the podcast, but let everybody know kind of, because we have that mutual friend in Guy Dorian Sr., him and his brother were the first official returning guests to the podcast and have been big supporters of mine. I can't thank those guys enough. How did you meet Guy, and about how long ago was that? You said about 10 years ago or so?
Well, I know he's wanted to work with me for about that long. I met him, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago. It's disgusting to think about it, but it was pre-COVID.
Gotcha.
That's like, BC, like before Christ and that kind of thing. It was like a new benchmark in every one of our lives.
It is. You always you start the sentence with at the start of the pandemic or after the pandemic.
Exactly. And to think about it, that was 2000, and this is April of 2025. That was 5 years ago. When the world was completely, when it was completely shut down. It was 5 years ago this month. And so it was prior to that. I met him at the Great Philly Con. And I think I met him before that too, but that was when we really started getting, I think, stares where he was like, look, we really need to do something together, and I said, yeah, man, I'm all for it, and this project that we're working on, really has originated from probably a little over 2 years ago when he first approached me about doing the project that we're currently working on together. And it was, he just, he called me and he asked me if I wanted to be involved with this. And at that time, it was just to let you know, it was Mounties versus the Werewolves right here. I got this. I set this up on. Hey, I don't know if that still works, but maybe not. It might still
QR?
work. I'm going to get that that QR
There you
code, because
go.
I know they still take, it has met its Kickstarter. It didn't need everything there, but I think you can still do late pledges on that.
Very cool.
And Mounties versus Werewolves. And he approached me a little over 2 years ago about it. And at that time, just, like you probably are aware, like a lot of comic book artists, a lot of them had day jobs of some sort, right? And
Yeah.
I took a day job about 19 years ago where I pretty much retired from comics. I did commission work, and I did shows to keep myself in the presence of the occasional cover for like an independent or something like that I would actually pencil in ink. And so he approached me like 2 years ago. I was still working for the man, so to speak. And he asked me if I'd be interested in doing this project. And he mentioned that, Larry Hama was writing it. He was penciling it, and his inker, who's been inking him for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years, something like that. Somebody you might have heard of, Sal Buscema. I don't know that guy.
Yeah, just a little, just a minor, some background inking assistant named Sal Buscema.
Yeah, right. And he asked me, he goes, would you be willing, it's a 44-page book, the first book, would you be willing to take out some of the inking chores and share the inking responsibility with Sal? And he's like, I hope you're okay with, Sal taking, like when you list the credits on the book, Larry Hama, Guy Dorian, is it going to be Kevin Conrad, is it going to be Sal Buscema first before, It's like, yeah, I think I can live with Sal's name above me, and
I think,
oh my God.
I think you could live with Sal's name being anywhere on there near your name.
Look, I love Larry. I love everything. I love Larry's history. I love everything he's done. I love Guy. Sal is my man. Okay. My favorite Hulk penciler, not inker, penciler, Sal Buscema. I mean, Sal is also something like the Defenders back in the day when I was a kid. That man could do no wrong in my eyes, and to have my name in the credits with Sal, I was like, yeah, where do I sign up? That type of thing, and so I did, and I said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm totally okay with that. And, so the first promo that went out for it, and I have it saved, was, my names are in the credit with Sal Buscema and Larry Hama, and Guy Dorian, and it's like, yeah, okay, I can die now, pretty much, And so I was very, very happy about that, very, very pleased about that. And so that was like over 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, probably. And it's taken, Kickstarter projects, that type of stuff. And you had a bunch of people involved, writers and pencilers and inkers and colorists and that kind of thing. And, it takes time to get these things off the ground.
Absolutely.
And it has, and it has met its goal, over, a few months back. And, and now it's just, we got to get this thing done. We got to get it out, and get it out to, everybody who's actually, funded this for us. And once that's done, it's said and done, and we get this book out, the plan is to shop it around to a publisher so we can get it under a publisher imprint. So it'll end up in, direct sales of the comic book market or the comic book stores, right? So we will be able to actually get it out in a reprint format. And at that time, Guy and I have talked about me actually penciling like a short backstory in the back of that and printing it. So, and I'm looking forward to that. So
that would be really cool.
So
let's go.
I'm really excited.
Let's go back to speaking on Sal, because I think it's a perfect segue into your introduction to comics as a kid, because you mentioned that when you were a kid, like his work really stood out to you. So take me back to when you were younger and you were first discovering comics.
So I was probably about 10, somewhere between 10 and 11 years old. And I had it was the biggest store that I actually would go to buy comics from that I discovered that I get comics every Wednesday. So Wednesdays? It
Yeah.
would be released, right? Wednesdays, right? Was this store called Danny's Confectionery in Schenectady, New York. It literally had a soda fountain. That was where it was a bar. You would sit in a bar with the stools, on the post, and the seat would turn around, the round seat, and you'd sit there and you'd order a vanilla cream soda. And they would pour they would shoot the syrup into the thing, almost like bars, right?
Oh,
They'd shoot the syrup into the glass, and then they'd shoot the soda water into the glass with the ice. And they'd hand you that, and behind me from that bar was a couple spinner racks of comics and, the wall style things like with the magazines and stuff where you'd see the magazines. And every Wednesday I would go in there and I would buy comics. I'd buy comics, I would buy the magazines. The biggest magazines that I buy at that time was Savage Sword of Conan. And, so where I found the first Kiss comic was on that wall and the thing with the magazines, because it wouldn't obviously fit in the spinner rack.
Yeah.
But yeah, spinner racks were my jam, back then, where I would buy the books. And my buddy and I, who turned me out to the first Kiss, the Kiss Alive album, we would go there every Wednesday and we would buy comics and we would clean the spinner rack out. And it got to the point where the guy said, "You can't buy all those. It has what are you talking about? They're for sale. Right? So you got to leave stuff for somebody else,
Yeah.
And that, that type of thing. So we had to find other stores too. So we ended up finding a bunch of other stores. I'm talking 10 to 12 years old. We would ride our bikes down there, and that was my, so you're talking 1971 on up, and that was my introduction into actually discovering comics, buying comics with my, my weekly allowance, that kind of thing. And oddly enough, when comics are 25 cents a piece and you get like a $5 weekly allowance, that's quite a few comics that you can go and buy, right? So, which, you're talking about inflation, kids might still get a $5 allowance. What are you going to buy? One book.
Exactly.
One book these days, right? Yeah. So
what kind of books were you picking up as far as like your traditional like Marvel comics? I know you mentioned Hulk, and I think you mentioned Defenders and stuff like that.
Yeah. My go-to, like, I was a Marvel boy. I would follow books because of the artist that was on the books in most cases. Sometimes it was a character that I loved. I didn't care who drew it. I would buy it anyways. But I wasn't a big DC guy, although I did love Batman and the Swamp Thing. And most of the time it was because of who the artist was. And the artist was either Neil Adams or Bernie Wrightson or something like that.
Hard to go
right.
wrong.
Yeah, those were my guys. So I was following them around, whether it was a magazine or DC or Marvel or Eerie or Creepy Magazine, that kind of stuff. That was what I would do. But Marvel. So yeah, Defenders, Avengers, The Incredible Hulk, Spider-Man was my guy. From when I started collecting, it was John Romita Sr. that was on it. But holy cow. How am I not remembering his name? The guy that started Spider-Man. Steve Ditko. Yes. So I was too young, at that time to actually have discovered Ditko's work. But my buddy who I collected comics with, he had an older brother who was 14 years older. So that guy had a stack of comics. So I was able to go through and rediscover like a lot of the stuff, like the older Spider-Mans and stuff with Ditko. And that man Steve Ditko was, ahead of his time, I thought, when he was doing Spider-Man. I mean, his work was really like the musculature and stuff like that is like, I was always about more artists or more based in reality. Now, a lot of people are going to shoot me and hate me, including Guy, because Guy is like blasphemy to say that I was not a fan of Kirby growing up,
right.
Jack Kirby. I was not.
I think a lot of people weren't, though. Like me, as somebody into art and all this for so many years and into comics, I didn't gain my appreciation for Kirby until over the past few years. That's when I started delving into and studying and kind of appreciating, just how fantastic the stuff that he was doing was, and how he was breaking a lot of rules to create this, pretty much groundbreaking type of stuff that you really can't do under the constraints of drawing properly.
Exactly. And that's so true. And I did not appreciate Kirby's work until I was actually working in the industry. And there were some great inkers that have worked with Kirby, that have inspired me to be an inker in the industry. But I gotta say, Kirby's pencils alone is where I discovered how much I realized that guy was a genius. You know what I mean? And as great as the inker was that worked on Kirby, I don't think there was anybody. And again, I know it's probably blasphemy to say this, but there wasn't an inker out there that could translate his pencils into the printed form and retain what he had, on that board in pencils. And let me get hit my wagon right now. But some of my inkers that was, like I said, my most formative inkers and Joe Sinna and Claus Jansen, all these guys from back in those days that really was or guys that I could see their inks and I know exactly, I don't care who they inked, I would know that it was that,
Yeah.
But something about Kirby's pencils, there was something beautiful about his pencils that could never be. And I've tried inking Kirby, and I've got a couple pieces that I've done that I've inked him, stuff that I pulled off the web. And it's just there's just something about it is something gets lost in translation.
It really does. Yeah. Some of the, whatever the magic was there, it fades away, and it could be a fantastic, he had some fantastic inkers work on him too, but it's like you said,
absolutely.
I've got a whole shelf here with Kirby, a whole Kirby section. And I have a couple of those where it's all the pencils, from the Demon and stuff. And it's just phenomenal.
Yeah, and absolutely is. But the Demon was later in his career too. If you look at the stuff that he did for Marvel back in the day, really, really early on, and I saw something now maybe a month or two ago or something where he was probably in his late teens, very, very early 20s, where his work you would not recognize it as being Jack Kirby. It was super tight, super realistic.
Super correct. Yeah. Proper anatomy, proper faces, everything.
Yeah. And it was gorgeous. Yeah. But it's not the Kirby that everybody knows and loves. You know what I mean? And, I attribute that to the same thing when you're talking about Pablo Picasso, with all the sideways faces and all this really abstract stuff. That man was and I kind of attribute it the same way. It's Kirby was bored drawing stuff.
Yep.
In the realm of reality, and he wanted to twist it a little bit. And the same thing with Picasso. He wanted to do the same thing, I think, so.
Yeah,
I respect that. Yeah.
I always point out to people, if you look at Kirby's stuff from the 40s, it's the anatomy's correct. Everything looks, the faces are normal. And I'm it brings to mind, it's one of my favorite expressions. And I've said it on here more than once. You have to master the ordinary before you can command the extraordinary.
I say that every time somebody comes up to me with a portfolio interview, when I'm at a show, and you got these, whether it's a kid or a young adult or whatever, and they show me their work and they're doing anime or, something a little bit more abstract, from the, and I was I would say it's great that you're inspired by anime. It's great that you're inspired to do your own thing, but you gotta know the foundation before you can abstract from that foundation.
Yep.
And that's somebody like Kirby, was that man who's able to do that,
Yeah. So what, do you remember the first book you really discovered Sal on when you were collecting? because Sal is one of these guys that put out so much consistently great work, but
I know
nobody, I mean, you and I have that appreciation. I know Guy has that. I think there's some of us that have that great appreciation for his art, but he was like consistent, and the quality of the work never seemed to diminish. Yet he's one of the most underappreciated artists, I think, especially from that age of artists. Everybody talks about John, his brother. Yep. Everybody talks about Kirby and Neil and all that, who are all phenomenal. But Sal was up there in his own right. So you kind of remember seeing his work and it just standing out to you?
So, I wish I could remember when I first discovered Sal's work, but that's a great question. But again, it all goes back to, it might have been the Hulk. I don't think it was the Defenders, because I know he was doing the Hulk before the Defenders, and I went, maybe the Avengers as well. All I know is I love that man's work from the very beginning. And he was somebody, even in his later years, was able to, because everything changes, styles change, and, out with the old, in with the new. And he was able to reinvent himself and do a completely different style. That if you looked at what he was doing, like on Spider-Man, and probably it was the 80s or 90s, I don't recall exactly when, to what he was doing in the 70s, you would not recognize that as the same artist. It's because he needed to evolve in order to still be in demand. And I appreciate that. And any artist that's able to do that kind of stuff. But it had to be the Hulk. I have to say, it had to be the Hulk where I first discovered his work. And again, a guy will probably shoot me down for saying this too. The Hulk is probably my favorite character. My favorite character to draw. Growing up, Spider-Man was absolutely my favorite character. Not my favorite character to draw, but my favorite character storyline and the character itself. The Ramita era, and then when he retired from doing Spider-Man and Los Angeles came on, and oddly enough, of course, because nobody likes change, I didn't care for Los Angeles' work when he came onto the book. But looking back at it as a full-grown adult, and all these years behind me and stuff like that, that guy was amazing. He was amazing. He was great, Sal, there was just so much about his work, the dynamicism of his work, and the emotion that he put into all the characters and stuff. It was just so good, the whole, getting slammed, in the head backer, that kind of stuff. That's quintessential Sal Buscema,
Yeah.
And I just love that man's work. And have my name in the credits with that man, or somebody amazing. That I grew up with. It's just like, I can die tomorrow. Well, I got to do the books first, then die.
There you go.
So then I can have his name, on the same page with mine. So I'd be very, very happy. Yeah.
Now, did you know when you were this young fan and you were looking at these amazing creations, did you kind of start getting the inclination that you wanted to, aim towards this being a career path? And were you always somebody that was kind of creative in drawing and doing this type of stuff when you were younger?
Yes and yes and yes. I don't remember not drawing. You know what I mean? Yes, I was an inker by trade, in the industry, that type of thing. But I don't remember not drawing. I've been drawing all my life. I have stuff. My mom died in 2000, and when we cleaned out her house, I found a box. She saved everything that I drew for her, all that kind of stuff. I have these memory, and so whatever, I had the wherewithal, even as a child, to date all my work.
Oh, cool.
So I could actually see, holy crap, I drew that, and I was only 5 years old, or I was only 7 years old, or whatever it was, and that's not bad. I'm looking at it now as an adult, like, yeah, that ain't bad, whatever. But But yes, and the same friend who introduced me to Kiss when he showed me that Kiss Alive album and played it for me, we're still friends today. We've been friends since we were 7 years old, and he lives literally half a mile up the road from me.
Oh, that's awesome.
He and I, so probably about 10 years old on up to our very early teens, would sit at either my kitchen table or his kitchen table, and we would draw superheroes, And at that period of time, it was like, I really love that cover. I want to draw that cover, and I would copy that cover, And he was, he did his best, but he was like, and he did get better, So I mean, however, not to toot my own horn and pat myself on the back, my stuff was always better than his. And, that kind of stuff. But that was it. That was the start of me wanting to work for Marvel. Was that when I was just drawing all the time, and I was, when I was a tween and going forward, and my mom would say, you really want to think of something else that you might want to do besides drawing? I go, I'm going to work for Marvel Comics. Yeah. At that time, I was like, I'm going to draw for Marvel Comics, Mom. I'm going to do that. And she goes, well, that's fine. I mean, that's great. But thank you. They have a backup plan, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And ultimately it worked out for me, that I ended up eventually obviously working for Marvel. That was my initial, that was my in to professional comic book work was Marvel Comics. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to speak on that too, because I know there's some obscurely, barely known guy named Greg Capullo who had maybe a little something to do with helping you getting your start. So why don't you talk about that obscure gentleman a little bit and what he means to the start of your career?
So that obscure gentleman, we grew up in the same city. We went to the same schools. And junior high school, we knew of each other. We did not know each other.
And you were the guys that were good at drawing, right? Is that
right,
kind of word gets around school?
Yeah, word gets around school. And I would draw something, and so we'd say, there's somebody else. There's this other guy, Greg, man, he draws just like you, and that kind of thing. So we would hear that stuff in junior high school. High school, it was my 11th grade. It was his 10th grade. He was a year behind me. We ended up finally meeting in our class because at that period of time, it was like all of a sudden now you got, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade are pretty much in the same room, right? And that's when we met. Was in he was in 10th grade, I was in 11th grade, and we became fast friends, at that time. And our art teachers, Carol Nastars and Gilda Samiel, they saw something in us that they didn't see in, pretty much anybody else that was in the art class, that we were well advanced from everybody else in school. And where they would give these projects to other students in our classes, they would give us college level, projects to do, that type of thing.
Right.
And so that was my start into, and at that time, like the art teachers were like, both of them really were like, comic books. Why do you guys want to do comic books? Comic books aren't, that's not art, that kind of thing. You guys are well beyond that. You should be able to do this and that, blah, blah, that kind of thing. But they supported us and they gave us these projects. And going, from that period, 11th, 12th grade and on, I had graduated. And Greg, we had started a band together, a rock band together, and he plays guitar, I played the drums, and we started doing stuff like that. So from the time I graduated high school in 1971 to probably 1981, it was a period of time where I didn't go to college. We wanted to be artists for comics, that kind of thing. We would take the train. We live in upstate New York, near Albany, New York at that time. And we would take the train down to New York City to Marvel Comics on Broadway, and we would bring our samples in, that type of stuff. And then, I went to college for 2 years. I went to a local college for arts for 2 years, and I got my applied associate's in applied science degree in commercial art. And I graduated in '83. In that period of time while I was going to school, we would be going down and submitting our work, and constantly getting shot down, like both of us getting shot down. Now, let me just preface all this with Greg was an incredible, insane talent, even at that time. He didn't go to art school. He didn't go to college, self-taught, that kind of thing. And pretty much I was too, but when I went to college, my art instructors were like, compete with me as an instructor, not your peers, because there's nobody that can compete with you, that type of thing. And so Greg continued to submit while I was in college, and I kind of got I was busy. I was in college. I had a full-time job at this time too, paying for my time in school. And when I graduated in that spring of '83, what the school gave me was a portfolio of work where I can also start going to advertising agencies and stuff. And I started doing work immediately. Greg continued to submit work to Marvel and getting shot down, unfortunately, which was unreal to think about when you think about Greg Capullo and see where he's at. He was every bit as good to get in at that period of time, when he was getting shot down. So I started getting work. Greg's doing his thing, right, with trying to get in there. Now, at that period of time, he didn't have a drafting table. I literally built him his first drafting table. I built it. I was handy that way. I was helping my grandfather from a child on, from, construction and, remodeling places and that kind of thing. So I was good with all that kind of stuff. And so he ended up finally getting to Marvel. I don't remember the year that he got in, but when I graduated school in '83, I started getting work in commercial art, right? But prior to him getting in, I was doing very well in the commercial art field at that time. I sort of lost the drive to get into comics at the time because I was making money, man. I was making good money, in the commercial art field, that kind of thing. And I introduced him to a lot of my art directors, that kind of thing. But before I did, I didn't teach him anything. I didn't teach him anything about art, but what I did was I helped him build a portfolio of stuff that would be, prior to him going to the art directors, helped him build a portfolio of work that would be sellable, and you're like, hey, this guy can do a crowd. This guy can do a crowd of people. This guy can draw cars. This guy can do that, blah, 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 blah. So I introduced him to a lot of my art directors, knowing full well I would lose work. And I was okay with that because I had plenty of work anyway. And he started getting work. And during that period of time, while he was getting work, he continued to, and oddly enough, Larry Hama I believe, was his stumbling block at Marvel at the time getting in. John Romita Sr. was all about, giving him work. And Larry Hama was the guy that was always like, the roadblock. And now I'm doing a book with Larry Hama.
Isn't that funny?
Ironically, right? And it is weird. And he eventually made it, and rightfully so. The guy was, just crazy, crazy talented. And I think his first book might have been a Daredevil issue or something. Then he got on Quasar. Yep. And he's, and then he started doing some work, and I'm doing fine, man. I'm doing fine in the commercial art field, and then he gets on X-Force, after Rob left, and he's just doing crazy well, and he's just growing by leaps and bounds, and I started to go, I want to teach you this, man. I want to get back into comics. Not back into comics. I want to get into comics. My first love, that type of thing. So all he did was give me Xerox copies, full-size Xerox copies of his pencils, of pages that he was penciling for the book. And I took those Xerox copies and I put them underneath Bristol, and I light locked those copies, and I inked via a light box. It was probably 3 or 4 pages of the issue that he was working on at that time. Now, those pages never saw print. You know, I think at the time, Harry Candelario might have been his inker on X-Force.
Right.
But I inked these pages, and when he sent out his next batch of pencils to his editor, Bob Harris, he just threw them in to the batch, you know, via Federal Express, right? Never said a word about what they were. And then Bob calls him and says, "Who ate these? Did you eat these?" And he goes, "No, my buddy Kevin ate them." And he was like, "Does he want work?"
That's amazing.
And that was all it took. And so and now keep in mind, I'm making over Greg Capullo. You know, the foundation is, you know, like you could be Scott Williams, man. And if the penciler is subpar, no matter how good your inks are, it's going to be great inks over a subpar penciler. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Greg, everything we needed was there. You know, so I'm inking over Greg, and I looked stellar inking over Greg. So I got work. I got work immediately. I started working over Greg, handful of pages, not a lot, not full books. You know, it's still Harry's book, you know, that kind of thing. And I started getting other books, you know, peripherally around that, you know, that type of thing, books that Bob was on, that Bob Harris as an editor was working on. So that helped me, you know, it was on the job training, man. So I had Greg helping me, you know, like, you know, we lived 20 minutes from each other. I would go over his house once or twice a week, and he had 2 drafting tables. One I built him and the one he bought. You know, when we would work, you know, I would ink and he would pencil, and I would get a lot of, you know, pointers from Greg. And one of Greg's other inkers I worked with him, Art T. Bear, you know, at the time, God bless that guy, man. You know, we're still friends to this day. We don't talk like we used to talk, but, you know, he got Art to literally coach me, you know, at that period of time. I would literally make Xerox copies and fax to Art to Bear. And Art would take those and he would pick them apart, and he would call me, and he would just give me all these pointers and stuff like that. Yeah, I didn't have to pay him. You know, he did it out of the graciousness of his heart, you know, and he was friends with Greg. And so if it was not for Greg, it was not for Art.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
I might not be sitting here talking to you right now, you know? So
cool it's so cool that they did that out of the kindness of their hearts, and just how it ended up leading where it's led. And, you know, you've worked with a lot of great artists over the years. One that really stands out to me is Tony Daniel.
Yeah.
And I want to say the first work I really noticed you guys together on was the Spawn Blood Feud stuff. And that was like pretty prolific, because Tony was really coming into his own, and
he was.
Because you guys did a lot of work at Image together, though. Like I think I told you before, when I was going through my personal collection, I stumbled on a more obscure one called The Humankind that you did with Tony as well.
Yeah.
The Blood Feud stuff, man.
Yep, exactly. But prior to Blood Feud, when Greg left X-Force and went to Todd, I was on X-Force. They got Tony. That was the first time I ever worked with Tony, was on X-Force. I want to say it was around issue maybe 36 or 38, maybe a little bit before that on X-Force. My first issue with X-Force was I'm sorry. Yeah, maybe it was around, I don't know. My first issue of X-Force was X-Force 22. That was my first professional work, actually, was inking over Greg. It was just a handful of pages. But somewhere along there, Tony and I took over that book, you know, and when Greg moved over to Spawn. And Tony and I, that's when Tony and I met. You know, we actually became really good friends over the time, fast friends. We talk all the time on the phone. Now, Greg leaves. I look great over Greg. Tony comes home and he's a kid, really. He's like, I'm 10, 12 years older than Tony. And at that period of time, he was probably in his very, very early 20s. And he comes in, and I'm making Tony over X-Force, and everything's good. Well, I thought so. Bob Harris didn't think so. My editor, and he took me off the book. I like to say I was fired off the book, but make it more dramatic. But he took me off the book. He didn't take me off out of the comics altogether. I ended up getting different work, and Tony had other people working on them, and that devastated me. That absolutely devastated me that I ended up losing that book. It was like a top 5 book at that time in the 90s, in 93 to 95 or something. And but it was probably the best thing that could have happened to me at that time. Bob Harris took me off that book, and I worked on, I don't know, dozens of pencilers in a very, very short period of time, maybe 6 months. And I grew by leaps and bounds by being able to do that. And I learned the craft working on all these other people. And I had the opportunity to come back and do a handful of pages over Tony, and they were like, holy shit, Well, and then I got back on the book as a regular anchor over Tony as a monthly gig. And we did some really, 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 really good work on X-Force at that period of time. And that was the best thing that could have happened to me, and you learn from that stuff. It was devastating. It crushed me, that I lost the book and stuff. But, I don't know that I have a type A personality, but I have a personality where I want to please, and I really did my best to improve my skills. And I did, so that happened. Greg goes on to Spawn. Blood Feud starts to be a thing. Spawn Blood Feud. Todd's looking for an art team for Spawn Blood Feud. He had a penciler, Brad Gorby. He needed an inker. Greg was like, hey, I know a guy.
Back to Mr. Greg again.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I did on Blood Feud. I did a which is, it's on my website somewhere, but I inked a piece over Brad. It came out great. Brad was great. And I don't know what it was, man, but I don't know, man. I don't know if Todd wasn't jazzed about Brad. So I don't really know what it was, but he was looking for a different pencil for the Spawn Blood Feud. And he asked me if I knew anybody. I go, well, I know this guy. And so, and here comes Tony, so Tony comes onto the book, and then we do the Spawn Blood Feud miniseries. Yeah. And in the meantime, I'm doing smattering of pages over Greg on the regular series, starting around issue 27, the Spawn, I think it was, until, Tony and I became, locked in over there. We did the Spawn Blood Feud miniseries, the 4 issues, and then the book was a little bit behind, and in the comic realm, you don't want that to happen because of sales, like with, Diamond and whatever it might be. And so Todd came up with a scheme, like in the issues of the 30s, issues 30 on up to issue 40, 2 issues a month came out. The even issues were mine and Tony's from 30 to 38. Yeah. Maybe issue 42, I don't know. But then the odd issues were Greg.
Yeah, I remember this period of time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we taught it like, in 10 months, we did, in that 10 months period of time, we caught up to whatever the 3 or 5 months or whatever the book might have been behind, and so that was great. That was a good run there. And from that period of time, I don't know what happened first, but I know I did. Tony might have went on to something else. And I ended up, we're forgetting Marvel, we're forgetting DC. I was still doing stuff for Marvel. I did a bunch of stuff with DC as well. And I continued to work for DC. But somewhere along the line, when working for Todd, I ended up doing over a year on Spawn the Dark Ages over Nat Jones as well.
Yep.
And I think before that run on Spawn the Dark Ages, I did the entire 3 run of Kiss Psycho Circus as well for Todd. So there was a lot going on with Todd. Todd was my, they talk about like Art teaching me and Art Tiber teaching me and Greg, giving me pointers and that kind of stuff. Todd gave me so much information. I learned so much from that man in the probably the 6, 7, maybe 8 years that I worked for Todd at that period of time. Yeah, it was a good time to be in comics. It really was.
It's so cool to hear about how all these connections and friendships and mutually, going out of your way to help each other led to all these things. And now, essentially, it's led to you working on a Kiss book when you're a huge Kiss fan. So that had to be completely just out of left field for you. Like, now I'm working on a Kiss book for Todd McFarlane.
That was insane. And I got to say that, and I've said this in other interviews and that kind of stuff. That book, those 31 issues that I inked, of that book, I inked the entire run, save for about, I don't remember, it was like 4 or 5 pages in like February 2000, my mom fell ill and she ultimately died. In that period of time, I had family stuff, but it was really only about 4 to 6, maybe 7 pages. And Jonathan Glapian helped me out with an issue of that book. And he was like, I don't even want credit. I go, no, I want you to have credit. I'm going to make sure you have credit for that. And I don't remember what issue it was, but he did help me out. And he and I are still friends. And he's a good dude, super talented, man. We know that.
Phenomenal artist in his own right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, but yeah, when Todd had, I think the initial invite to do that book, Todd asked Greg if I'd be interested in doing it. Greg asked me, and then the conversation happened with Todd, and it was like, yeah, man, I'll do that book.
You're like, you had me at Kiss.
Yeah, exactly. So we ended up having to, wait, I don't remember if he had Angel initially, but he might have had Angel initially. There might have been somebody else in the works, for that book. But I was set to do that book in the beginning now, and then it sat for, I don't know, it seemed like forever. It might have been just a few weeks, or it might have been a few months where all the legalities had to be worked out between Todd and Kiss, Gene Simmons, and when Todd finally came back to me, this is okay. So the book is a go, but there's one caveat. And I was like, what's that? He goes, Gene needs to own all the pages of the original art of the book. So we need to come up with a plan for the original art. You and Angel, have to come up with a price, a buyout for the original art in order to make this book happen. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So Angel, I don't know what Angel, I'm sure Angel commanded more per page than I did, from the original art. For a 24-page book, I would get 8 pages of the book back. Angel, the pencil would get 14 pages. And even if it was a 22-page book, I'd still get 8 pages, and then the penciler would get, 12? Oh, 14 and 8 is, wait. 14 and 8 is 20. 24 page. Maybe I got 10. I don't know. It's been a while. I don't remember. But anyway, I got roughly 1/3 of the book back, and so we had to come up with a monetary figure for the pages. And we did, he did, and I did. I don't know if his was the same as mine. But so the book ultimately happens, and I would get paid by 2 separate checks. I would get paid a page rate for the 24, 22 or 24 page. I think Psycho Circus is 24 pages. The 24 pages of the book, and then I would get paid by separate check from Todd McFarlane Productions for the buyout of the 1/3 of the book that was supposed to come back to me. So I would never physically see the artwork come back to me like you would with Marvel or DC or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that worked out great up until issue 28 when around issue 28 of the book, where it stopped making money, the book was ultimately going to be canceled after issue 31. So we knew 3 months in advance that issue 31 was going to be the last issue of the book. And so that period of time, I got a great story that I am going to refrain from saying, but ultimately when the book stopped making money, I can tell you this much. Those pages sat in Todd's office for probably a half a dozen years over legal issues. You know,
wow.
with those 3 issues of the book. Ultimately, when all was said and done, the art ultimately ended up coming back to me, and at that time was Clayton Crane for the last probably 12 issues of the book, that penciled the book. And Clayton and I, between the two of us, said, Clayton was like, you take the last issue 31. I penciled the cover for that. He inked it and did a great dragon in the background of what I had drawn. He had actually penciled it himself. And then he took the previous 2 issues. So I had a full issue of the book. He had 2 full issues of the book. I had the cover for the very last issue plus 2 inventory covers, for subsequent issues that was supposed to happen. And he got a bunch of stuff as well. And I unfortunately, regrettably, put those on eBay and sold everything. I got 1 page of talking heads from one of those issues. But the thing is, none of that, there was none of that work that was in circulation. So I saw more money at that period. Like the 3 covers that I sold, even the 2 that never saw print, I saw more money from those 3 pages of art than I saw from the full issue that I got paid for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was pretty crazy. So it was a good time. Now, if you go and you try to look for those pages that are currently available, I don't think Clayton ever sold any of his. So the only pages that are in circulation are the ones that I sold.
Yeah.
That issue that I sold. They're commanding some decent prices. Not Rob Liefeld prices, but they're commanding some decent prices.
All right.
No. Yeah.
Well, as we start to land the plane, as they say, because I want to say this, I got to have you back on because your career is just too vast, and there's so many things I want to talk about, but we only got so much time.
Right.
So trust me, everybody. He'll be coming back on, and we're going to get into more detail of this career spanning so many years, so many decades now. But I wanted to give you a chance as we start to wrap things up to talk about your upcoming project. We touched on it a little bit, Mounties versus Werewolves, and any other things that you can talk about that you would like to promote. I want to speak on that stuff a little bit now.
Sure, yeah. So Mounties versus Werewolves. I'll put this back up and see if I can get that. I don't know if you guys can try. Maybe that QR code will work. I don't know that it will, but it might.
I'll put the link in the description as well.
Yeah. And there's the image that I did with. Here's actually down here. I know I got that light, so it's kind of so I got to hit it on an angle.
Yep, I see it. Yep.
But yeah, so I did that with Guy. Currently, that's only when we fulfill that, when we finish this, it's only obviously for the people who bought the book, who contributed to the Kickstarter. But again, that will, to reiterate, that will go, the plan is to get it into the direct market in some way, shape, or form with another publisher. So it'll be reprinted and with extras. One of the extras, Guy and I talked about, was me doing penciling an 8-page backstory. So that would be cool to kind of flip roles, and maybe Guy could ink that. So that's the project that I'm actually excited about and working on. I do a lot of commission work for fans. I've penciled a number of penciled and inked a number of covers for independent books from different, different companies, Icon Heroes. I penciled a book. I penciled the cover. It's called Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah,
Yeah,
Zujitsu.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I penciled a cover for Live in Pain as the title of the book. I don't recall the publisher for that. The penciler is Chris Graves. It's his creation with Mark Polton, who's a co-creator of Evangeline. I penciled a cover for that. Penciled a cover for a buddy of mine we have a lot of Kiss connections together. He's Joey Casada. It's called Chicken Monkeys. That's available on the Amazon.com right now. I penciled that cover as well for the third issue of that. And again, I'm busy with commission work. I've done some CD covers and that type of pencil, some CD covers and that type of, particularly a couple Kiss tribute CD album covers and that type of thing as well. So yeah,
you've been busy and you inked for so many years. What's that transition now to being more? It sounds like you're doing a lot more pencil work these days and doing your own art. So what's that transition been like for you?
So, like I said from the start, like I always wanted a pencil for Marvel. That was my biggest goal. When I got in as an inker, I didn't intend on being an inker. I got in as an inker, and thankfully and luckily, and through the help of some very experienced people in the industry, I got really good at it, at a period of time. And so I got, so the whole penciling thing sort of got put on the back burner and working for comics. I did do back in probably the mid 90s, I did a three issue book called Jay Zan Wild's Carnival Souls, and I penciled that. And it went to colors directly from my pencils. I pencil very, very tight. So I didn't have to ink, I inked the colors, that kind of thing. And, but the transition from an inker to a penciler, to answer your question, is like, I always wanted to pencil. I can pencil, and I love penciling, and that's ultimately what I want to do. And so now, like pretty much everything I do, I do ink other people. Like for instance, like I'm inking Guy, right?
Yeah.
But I, for the most part, if I'm going to ink, I'm going to ink myself these days. This is something that an opportunity that I had to work with Guy and Larry and Sal. That was like I couldn't pass that up. I will ink on occasion somebody else, for something. I do like I haven't missed. I don't know if you're familiar with the Inkwell Awards,
Yes.
where and I've done for the last. I've been involved with every one of those challenges, over Jim Lee, over recently Rudy Nebres, over Joe Sena, over Jim. I said Jim Lee. Savage Dragon.
And Larson.
Yeah, Eric Larson.
Yeah.
Neil Adams, all that kind of stuff. And that's really cool because I do that. I obviously don't get paid for that. That is something that gets put up for auction for all the money goes towards helping, artists who are struggling, with medical debt, that kind of stuff like that. And, that is like one of my favorite things to do is those Inkwell challenges, because I love to see, and that's really the proof of the pudding as an inker, that everyone talks about, like chasing Amy is like the bane of any inker's existence. You know what I mean?
Tracer.
You know what I mean? Yeah, right, exactly. But there in itself, right there, if you go to the Inkwell Awards and you see these challenges and you see 10 to 20 different inkers handling the same piece, you can see that, yes, are there inker, do you have to trace, and there are some pencilers who want nothing more than you to just complete their lines in black ink,
Yeah.
But the more confident pencilers, people like Greg Capullo, people like Tony Daniel and I could raffle off probably 10 more that you're confident in your ability to pencil and you are confident in the team that you have and your inker that you have. And they can give you less on the page where the inker is able to actually express himself as well.
Yeah, they leave room for you guys to interpret the pencils and to even embellish a little bit if you would like.
For sure. Absolutely. And the Inkwell Awards is the perfect example of that, where you can say, okay, they're tracing, and you look at these, you put these 10 to 20 pieces side by side, and you'll see they're all of them are very, very different. And that's something that something that I always try to express, like, what does an inker do? That kind of thing. And I don't know how much time we have, but I did bring, and again, I know we're talking about a camera, but this is one I'm going to show you something that was a cover for, I think it's probably issue 33 of Kiss Like a Circus That Never Happened.
Oh,
over
awesome.
here, right over here, right there. That was what Clayton gave me.
Yeah.
And, you can see the Kiss logo on the forehead of the skull. And this is what I ended up doing.
Oh,
right?
That's amazing.
So, again, this is just a print, from my print. I put them side by side so you can see see the difference. And I got others, but I'm not gonna bore you with that. But
no, it's not. So here's the thing. That's not boring. And when we have you back, I'm going to have you with a lot more of those things prepared. And I want to, when we have you back on, I want to talk more about like process and stuff too, because I'm a process junkie when it comes to art. And I know a lot of the listeners are too, because we have a lot of aspiring artists that listen and watch. So next time we have you on, we're going to have to go deep into the process of drawing and inking too.
That would be great. Ultimately, the best way to make where that would be, where your viewers can see it, would be sharing the screen. Like if you go on my website or something like that, where you can actually
do that.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah,
we have the power. We will make it happen.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome.
Awesome. Well, listen, you've spent a lot of time with me today, and I greatly appreciate it. Little inside knowledge for the listeners. This is actually our second time recording. We ran into some technical difficulties many months ago, but it looks like, I don't want to jinx it at the very end, but it looks like this one is A-okay. The technology gods were on our side. So I want to give you the spotlight here at the end to let everyone know where to follow you, where to find you on social media, if you have a website, all of that kind of stuff. Now's your time, sir. Take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, so Kevin Conrad Art, all one word, .com. I haven't updated it in a few months, but I do need to update that. You can follow me on Facebook. It's Kevin Conrad Art as well. Instagram is also Kevin Conrad Art. You can follow me there as well. For those that don't know, we didn't get into that. We talked about my fandom as a Kiss geek. I'm also in a Kiss tribute band called History. Look up History Tribute Band on Facebook, and you will see. If you follow me on Facebook, you can actually probably be easier that way too. But I portray Eric Carr, the drummer that actually replaced Peter Criss, when Peter Criss left, and in this band, and we do about 8, 10, 12. 15 shows a year, I'm in upstate New York. So throughout New York, Pennsylvania, Jersey, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Maine, in that area there. And full makeup, all get out. You can find pictures, on there you'll see. We also have a Peter Criss in the band too. So recently we got 2 drummers, because there's not another Kiss tribute band out there that does that, that has both drummers. So it's pretty cool. So first half of the set, Peter Criss plays, and then the second half of the set, it's all me. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, and it's something else for me to pass my time away.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome, my friend. Well, listen, hang out with me for a moment while I give my spiel to everybody. Everybody, go out, follow Kevin on all different places. Check out his website. Check out his Facebook, Instagram. Make sure you keep up on him. Make sure you go back the Mounties versus Werewolves project with him and Guy Dorian and Larry Hama. I believe, like he said, there's still an option to back, even though it's already been funded. Keep an eye out if the publishing happens and Kevin gets to take on the art duties for a backup story in one of those. That would be amazing. And as far as our podcast, you're already listening, so you probably know where to find us, but I encourage you to watch on youtube.com/@nerdymewsings, because all these awesome creators come on and they show not only their awesome memorabilia and scenery that they have in their studios, but also some artwork like Kevin was showing and everything else. So you can watch on YouTube and you can listen on any of your favorite podcast platforms for the audio version. Everybody, until next time, keep it nerdy.
Thank you.